Hello and welcome. We're thrilled that you've joined us tonight for At Home with HIP. I'm Kate Comfort Hart, Executive Director of HIP Housing, San Mateo County's own human investment project. I'm joining you tonight from the community room at Redwood Oaks, a 36-unit apartment building that we rehabbed last year and that is home to 54 of the 1,400 low-income people we help to house. We all know that having a safe, affordable place to call home has the power to break the cycle of poverty and end homelessness. At HIP Housing, we work hard to ensure that anyone we work with has the greatest possibility of finding an affordable place to live, and there has never been a more important time for our work. The people our programs help to house have suffered dramatically during COVID, and the time for recovery is now. Tonight, your support makes you part of the recovery and part of what makes San Mateo County an amazing place to live. We are so honored to have our very own Congresswoman Jackie Speier here to introduce our keynote speaker, the incredible Professor Catherine Eden. We promise a thought-provoking hour, so grab a drink and we'll start with a short video featuring Elizabeth, one of our many important HIP Housing clients.
I was born and raised in Redwood City. I'm one of 4 children to immigrant parents. They constantly worked multiple jobs. Most of the jobs were minimum wage jobs. We always wondered how come we couldn't, be signed up for sports. How come we didn't go on vacations? But it was literally because my parents were saving every penny in order to be able to provide that for us. During the process of 8th grade, I ran away from home. And I ended up incarcerated. I was in and out of juvenile hall. My whole trajectory on education changed once I got incarcerated. The adults that were supposed to be empowering me were actually putting me down. It really embedded in my brain that I was going to be nothing, nobody, that I was worthless. That really took away from me believing in myself. In 2012, at the age of 20, I became pregnant. I didn't want to raise my child the way I was raised, and I needed to come up with a plan. Eventually, that plan resulted in higher education. When I went back to school, I felt like I was finally learning. I was finally getting enriched with education. When my second daughter was born in 2015, at that moment, I decided to take a huge risk. I quit my full-time job to pursue my education full-time. I graduated from College of San Mateo with 3 associate degrees. The ceremony was very special because both my daughters were able to walk the stage with me. I eventually transferred to San Francisco State and became a Gator. In 2018, I connected with HIP Housing and I became part of the self-sufficiency program.
Within the self-sufficiency program, there's a lot of things that we offer. The first thing that we have is affordable housing. That's the first thing that we offer and why people are drawn to us. And by doing your education plan, vocational plans, financial literacy, parenting, and also working on your mental health. The goal of the program is to find self-sufficiency after it. And working with Elizabeth, she was really focused and knew what direction she wanted to go in. It was an honor and a pleasure for me just to walk alongside of her. She was really about action.
I was able to focus on my education. I was able to focus on healing, and really helped me focus on being the parent that I always wished I had.
It is hard being a single parent of 2 daughters, but Elizabeth has shown that she can get it done. And one of the things that she really emphasizes with her girls is the importance of academics. Elizabeth is highly engaged in their academic studies, and she plays a big part in the school and the decisions that they have to make for their children.
Higher education is very important to set an example for my daughters. I think they're both very aware that I want them to go to college. Also, dream big and see how far education can take them.
Now that she has her bachelor's degree, she wants to pursue a master's or go to law school. Elizabeth is the perfect example of what a success story looks like for the self-sufficiency program. She accomplished her academic goals. She accomplished her goal of finding housing after our program. She found employment that was gainful and something that she loves to do, and she's able to be with her family and provide for them in a manner that helps them move forward in their lives.
It's very important that my daughters realize that the sacrifices I've taken have been for them, and to really plant the seeds on what they can achieve if they really set their mind to it. I want to thank HIP Housing. They've really genuinely cared for me and my kids.
Hello again. Okay, before I introduce Congresswoman Spear, I want to ask you to please join me in investing in human potential like Elizabeth. And by investing, I mean donating. By donating today, you will be part of our recovery fund. The recovery fund will provide direct relief to clients struggling to get back on their feet post-pandemic, and it will be instrumental in moving HIP Housing staff, operations, and clients from pandemic mode to life-changing recovery mode. Donating is easy. Click the donation link on the screen or use your cell phone's camera to access our QR code, which is both on your screen and in your written invitation. You can also go to our website to donate or just send us a check using the return envelope in your written invitation. Every donation of any size will help us to reach our goal of raising $140,000 for our recovery fund. I'm super excited to say that we've already raised over $100,000, and to kick off the remaining $40,000, our board has just pledged to match the first $5,000. So double your donation by being one of the first to donate. Be part of HIP Housing and our county's recovery by donating right now or at any time during this event. From the days when her parents offered a room to rent through our home sharing program, to her days as a local county supervisor, to today as our Congresswoman, Jackie Spear has always been a wonderful HIP Housing champion. Jackie has spent a lifetime as a fearless fighter for equality and remains undauntedly committed to eliminating government corruption and to strengthening America's national and economic security. She was named to Newsweek's list of 150 fearless women in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, representing California's 14th District in the U.S. House of Representatives, the Honorable Congresswoman Jackie Spear.
Thank you, Kate. I'm thrilled to join you, even from a distance and virtually, for the HIP Housing Annual Lunch, because your work is so important. It truly transforms lives. Last year, 1,400 people had a place to call home because of HIP Housing. Since its founding in 1972, 70,000 people have been served by this invaluable agency. HIP Housing's home sharing program is a win-win for home seekers and home providers, and really for the entire community. It is one of the smartest and most effective ways to keep people housed, even in our unforgiving housing crisis. The ongoing housing shortage in the Bay Area, especially affordable housing, has been even more impacted by the fallout of the pandemic. By moving home seekers into spare rooms or affordable units, we are maximizing our existing housing. It's also a great way to keep residents and workers local, and it's a way to share dignity. I experienced the value of home sharing up close when my parents opened their home many years ago. Everyone in the house developed a special bond and friendship. It also gave me additional peace of mind knowing that I had an extra set of eyes on my parents. HIP Housing also teaches people to become self-sufficient. The self-sufficiency program provides housing assistance and support services to low-income families while they complete an education or job training program to find employment. Last year, 56 families graduated from this fantastic program that coached them to become productive and independent members of our community. And the permanent housing through apartments that HIP operates offers peace of mind to hundreds of people every year. San Mateo County is a better and kinder place because of HIP housing. I applaud all the volunteers, the staff, the board members, and the foundations supporting HIP housing that make all this outstanding work possible. Thank you for your tireless commitment to transform lives. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker. Catherine Eden is one of the nation's leading poverty researchers, specializing in understanding low-wage workers and people on public assistance. She is the author of 8 books and some 60 journal articles. She co-authored $2 a Day, The Art of Living on Virtually Nothing in America. I'm particularly looking forward to hearing her talk about that. You know, a few years ago, I took the food stamp challenge and lived on $4.50 a day for 4 days. It was a profound experience. I couldn't concentrate. I thought about food all day. I can't imagine trying to live on less than half of that. Catherine Eden is going to take us into a world no one in America should have to live in. Thank you, Catherine, for joining us. The floor is yours.
It's great to be with you here tonight at a lunch, which is not a lunch. Although we're virtual, I hope that we can connect in a profound way tonight through the stories that I'll be sharing with you. So next slide. I wanted to take you to Baltimore, because Baltimore is where this story started, the story of learning about the rise in extreme poverty, the rise in the number of families living on less than $2 per person per day in the United States. It really started here. This is the Latrobe Homes in Baltimore along Madison Street, sitting in the shadow of a Dickensian Victorian era prison. And it was here that in 2013, I knocked on the door of Ashley. Now, I knew that Ashley had just had a baby. She was part of a study I'd been doing, but I hadn't talked to her for several years. And when she opened the door, I knew something was wrong. Her hair was unkempt. The baby was fussy. She wasn't making eye contact with me. And maybe most worryingly of all, is she was passing her infant from one side of the body to her other side of the body to comfort that infant. She wasn't doing that critical thing that all parents learn to do, and that is supporting the baby's head. So I walked up the stairs behind Ashley, and in the apartment, there was no furniture. There was just a stained mattress with a torn Bugs Bunny fitted sheet. There was one chair. The table only had 3 legs. It was shoved against the wall. It was useless. And I sat on the floor while Ashley sat in the chair. We began to talk. Now, I was supposed to be doing a study on the transition to adulthood, and I had all these questions I had prepared to ask Ashley. But instead, I began asking her about the living conditions that she was experiencing. Now, earlier in my career, in the early 90s, I had spent 6 years traveling the country talking to low-income single mothers who relied either on welfare or low-wage work. And, I've spent a lot of time detailing their budgets with them and all of that kind of thing. But Ashley's story was different because she didn't have any form of public assistance coming to the household. Of course, she did have the housing subsidy. And she didn't have any income coming in from work. And in fact, there was no cash income coming into this household at all. So as I was sitting on the floor, I had this amazing view of the kitchen, and the kitchen cabinets in this particular unit had been taken off. And I could see there was nothing in the cupboards. When I later asked her what was in the fridge, there was nothing in the fridge either, except for a carton of half-spoiled milk. And more worryingly than anything else, there was no baby formula. So, you never know when you're going to have an epiphany. And this was a bit of an epiphany for me. I thought, I had stopped studying the public assistance or welfare system before welfare reform in 1996. And I'd gone on to study other things. But the question popped up in my mind: could it be that in the world's most advanced capitalist society. A new kind of poverty had arisen in the aftermath of welfare reform, poverty so deep that we didn't even know it existed. And so I had that thought, and then frankly, I went about my work. And it wasn't until the fall when my co-author Luke Schaefer came to Harvard, where I was teaching at the time as a visiting professor. And I told him the story of Ashley, that he actually had the skills and the expertise to take the nation's data infrastructure and really identify whether Ashley's story was just a blip or a trend. And the next slide will show you exactly what he found. This is the first chart Luke produced, and it found that since in the aftermath of welfare reform, there had been an astonishing growth in the number of families with children living on virtually no cash income. Next slide. So, you know, if you're a social scientist, you always know to never trust one survey. The survey I just showed you is the best census survey at collecting all kinds of income. It's called the Survey of Income and Program Participation. But you want a lot of different data sources to make sure you're right. What you see in those blue squares are our original estimates from this survey. And the red line is administrative data from the food stamp program showing the number of families reporting zero income to the program, either at the time that they apply or the time that they recertify. And what is astonishing about these two different kinds of data, one administrative we see is there's a gap between our estimates and the food stamp estimates, and the food stamp estimates are considerably higher. So when we first developed this chart, we showed it to some experts at Columbia University, and they said, well, I know what that is. That's the rise in family homelessness. The surveys are not picking up people who are no longer housed. Next slide. So, you know, numbers can only take you so far. I'm a go out and talk to them type person. I'm called an ethnographer. And so what we decided to do is to put ourselves to the test. We wanted to pick 4 cities that we weren't familiar with and that varied in various ways. Chicago, kind of an average city. Cleveland, a city that had been very important in industrial power, but had fallen on hard times, a site in Appalachia, and a site in the Mississippi Delta. And we said, can we go there for just a few months, and can we actually find families living like the numbers say, on virtually no cash income? And are they really there? And what are the costs, if so, to them and their children of living on so little cash income? Next slide. So from the 18 families we met and followed over many months and years, now it's many months and years, we developed what we call a 3-legged stool of causes. What caused the rise in this extreme form of cashless poverty? The first was the veritable death of the welfare system. Next slide. So in 1994, right before welfare reform, there were about 15 million people on welfare, 10 million kids, 5 million adults, about 5% of Americans. And roughly 2/3 of Americans who are living in poverty, families with children, had their lives touched by the cash welfare system in that year. Next slide. But today, the story could not be more different. As of September, actually, this is a little too high. The numbers have kept going down. Only about 3.6 million people are on welfare, 2.6, most of them children, less than 1 million adults, about 1% of Americans. And only 23 poor families in the United States with children are touched by our cash welfare system, a dramatic decline. Next slide. So this is the story in California, and California has typically looked more generous on paper because the poverty line doesn't account for the cost of living. So the poverty line is exactly the same in rural Idaho as it is in San Mateo County. But nevertheless, we see that there's been a dramatic decline in California and the number of poor families that are being touched by the cash welfare system today, from 121%. And again, remember that the poverty line does not adjust for the cost of living. So this is a big underestimate of poverty, especially in California where living costs are so high, down to 70%. So again, even in California, that's a relatively generous state, we have seen this dramatic decline in the number of needy families with children getting any kind of cash aid from the state. Next slide. So when we were writing our book, $2 a Day, we titled one of the chapters, Welfare is Dead. And we actually didn't do it because of the numbers. We did it because the system was so profoundly dead in the minds of the recipients themselves. Next slide. They didn't even think to apply for the program when they had need. Madonna Harris was living with her daughter Brianna in a series of homeless shelters across Chicago. And I said to Madonna, why don't you just go to the welfare office? And she looked at me and said, haven't you heard? They're not giving that out anymore. So few people in Chicago in her network had applied for or received welfare. It just wasn't on her radar. The next slide. Similarly, I was sitting with Travis Compton in Johnson City, Tennessee, his wife Jessica and his two little girls. We were all kind of clustered on the only piece of furniture in the room, a bed. And Travis walked over to the window to look outside. He was watching for the sheriff's deputy because the family was about to be evicted. Both Travis and Jessica had lost their jobs, and in this seasonal economy, after the tourist trade dried up, and they'd gone 4.5 months without any form of cash income, except, as you'll see, from Jessica selling her plasma. And so Luke was with me, and he said, Travis, what about welfare? What about public assistance? And Travis looked at him blankly and said, what's that? Next slide. So Ray McCormick from Cleveland had heard of welfare. And she didn't want to apply because she felt she had too much pride and felt that her father, who was deceased, would be disappointed in some way. You know, he didn't raise her to be that way, but she was living essentially in an abandoned building, and where the power had been sort of hooked up illegally through a neighbor, and it was a house in terrible condition. And so finally, she did go to apply. And she was told by a caseworker, honey, I'm sorry, there are just so many needy people. We just don't have enough to go around. And by our reading, Cleveland, of the state of Ohio, was sitting on a welfare surplus, a considerable welfare surplus at that time that they weren't able to spend. Ray applied 3 more times, and this happened to her each time. Next slide. So what about the next stool, leg in the stool? Perilous work. What we did when we reformed welfare is we said, we're going to put all of our eggs in the basket of work. We're going to support workers. We're going to expand workers' tax credits. We're going to really encourage people to get out there and work. But at the same time, we put all our eggs in that basket of work. Work began to fail us. Next slide. So when we first started studying the $2 a day poor, we thought that they were a group of people divorced from the world of work. But indeed, next slide, what we found is that even the very poorest households in America were deeply connected to work. The vast majority of children whose parent experienced a spell of $2 a day poverty was also in the labor force in that same year. So what we saw with this $2 a day poverty are people who are really trying to hold on to the ragged edge of the low wage workforce, and we're ending up falling into spells of extreme poverty when they lost or couldn't keep jobs. Next slide. So what's happened to the low wage labor market? First, we know that there has been a growth in unsafe work conditions, and I'll tell you a story about that in a minute. It's very hard to find full-time work if you don't have a college or associate's degree in this economy. Your work hours fluctuate, very difficult for parents with young kids, and frequent labor law violations. We know these have gone up. One common one is to make a hotel attendant clean a room before she clocks in. So these unstable jobs, which are getting more unstable over time, began mixing with unstable personal lives. So volatile living arrangements. We know that Ray McCormick was living in this abandoned building, but she had a landlord of sorts, kind of a fictive kin, a guy who was sort of keeping the electric going and the water running, and he was charging Ray almost all of her earnings at Walmart for rent and the use of a truck. And so Ray, loved her job at Walmart. She'd been named Employee of the Month twice. So she was very excited about this job. And one day she got into the truck that she had paid her landlord to use, and there was no gas in the tank. He and his wife had driven up all the gas over the weekend. And Ray was frantic. She calls her manager and she says, "Can someone give, the two-time Employee of the Month a ride or a break?" And the manager said to her, "Honey, if you can't get into work, don't bother coming back." He's got 100 people in line waiting for that job, and someone who couldn't get reliably to work was just not going to cut it for him. Friends and family can be supportive, but they can also be unsupportive and even harmful. So Jennifer Hernandez bounced around the same set of homeless shelters as Madonna Harris did with her daughter Brianna. But finally, in desperation to get out of this cycle of going from homeless shelter to homeless shelter, she accepted the offer of an uncle to come to a small town in Texas and stay in the spare bedroom. And so off she went with the two kids on the Greyhound bus, and they got there, and she managed to get a job at the little airport Jose, who had been so gracious in letting the family stay at the house, was molesting her 9-year-old daughter. And so, what happens when this occurs? She grabs her little daughter, Caitlin, her son, Cole. They go into the bedroom. They throw everything they have in pillowcases, and they run out of the house to the local Goodwill. And those folks emptied an office to make a place for them to stay until Jennifer could get back on her feet. Next slide. So the third form of, the third cause, the third leg on the stool is really the affordable housing crisis. As I've hinted at in several of these stories, homelessness and housing instability are ubiquitous among the $2 a day poor. Next slide. So it's a hallmark of life, and you would think that doubling up would be a source of support. But as Jennifer Hernandez's story that I just shared indicates, we saw again and again and again that doubling up was a source, often ending in sexual, physical, or emotional abuse. When Jennifer recounted her story to me, she looked at me and said, "I never expected that." Ray McCormick, who had been living in $2 a day poverty ever since her father passed away when she was 9, looked at us matter-of-factly and said, "Yes, I've been beat, I've been raped." Next slide. Now, of course, we're here at a housing event, and housing has never been more important than it is now, in part because so many children are experiencing homelessness. This is the number of homeless children as reported by their schools. The current data are actually higher than this. About 1.4 million children are now reported as homeless by the nation's schools in 2019. And of course, that number may well rise as eviction moratoriums end. So we were so struck by this rise in the number of homeless children. And we wanted to know, does it matter? Does the decline, the collapse of the welfare system matter for child homelessness? Are the two related to each other? When states decide to stop giving cash aid to needy families, does that push more needy families into homelessness? Next slide. And so by using fancy statistical techniques, I'd be happy to explain later, we found that the answer was yes. And in fact, startlingly, for every 100 fewer families on public assistance in a state over a year's time, we see 14 more children homeless. 14 more children homeless. So the collapse of welfare is part and parcel, taken together with the affordable housing crisis, is part and parcel of what is driving the increase in child homelessness since we started measuring it in the early 2000s. Next slide. So how do people survive? As you could imagine, private charities like the one you're here to celebrate are crucial. But oftentimes the most well-resourced places have the most well-resourced charities, and other places have virtually no charitable sector. And as anyone will tell you who works in the nonprofit sector, their resources are really only a small part of what it takes to meet the need. It's not common to trade your SNAP benefits, your food stamp benefits, for cash. We know that from other data, but it's very common among the $2 a day poor, and often they only get 50 to 60 cents on the dollar for it. Alva Mae Hicks, for example, down in the Mississippi Delta, she has no source of cash income, so she sells her SNAP to pay the light bill, and it takes about half her SNAP benefits to do that. But the problem is that her kids, nearly a dozen kids, some older and grown, but quite a few still living in the house, end up very, very hungry. As a result, they only have food stamps for a couple of days beyond the first week, oftentimes. And so it's really consequential if you have to trade your SNAP in order to keep the light bill on and to keep the heat on in a climate in her hometown that in the year that I interviewed her, it ranged from 9 degrees to 109 degrees. Now, we do see some old-fashioned American ingenuity. Paul Heckwalder was a family pizza business collapsed in the face of the recession, and one by one, all of the family members ended up crowded into Paul's tiny house. Paul and his wife Adrienne were hosting 22 guests in this house, and this house was so worn you could literally sit in the toilet and see through the floorboards into the living room. But he was determined to figure this out. He with the help of his grandkids, he took the gutter apart, he rigged it above the garbage can, and used the rainwater then to flush the toilets. He had all kinds of other schemes. He dug his own well in the basement and so on. So we do see this American ingenuity, but we also see people doing things that most of us think parents of children shouldn't have to do to survive. Plasma sales was one of those things. It was very common, so ubiquitous in our sample that many that we talked to bore a small scar in the crease of an elbow from frequent plasma donations. Jessica Compton, she only weighs 109 pounds. She literally has to eat protein bars in order to pass the tests. about once a month and once a week. And the U.S. is the only country in the nation that allows you to donate that often. Other countries deem that a health hazard. And she told me, especially if my iron's down, I get really tired. I get exhausted. Next slide. Now, I just want to show you some other evidence of that the kind of survival strategies that we see here, the private charity, plasma sales, are going up in the United States as our cash welfare system is collapsing and coming head to head with that affordable housing crisis. This is food pantry utilization, so we see the exact same pattern that we saw with that zero income SNAP line, right? The need is growing. The need is growing, and people are knocking more and more loudly on the doors of our nation's food pantries over time. Next slide. This is one of the plasma clinics that I spent a lot of time at. I used to sit outside of this clinic, and there's a bus stop across the street, and I would watch again and again 30 to 40 people get out of that bus and stand in line at that clinic. I sent a news crew there in the winter a couple of years ago, and one of the young women standing in line was barefoot. So, you know, is Jessica alone, or is our families finding more and more that they have to resort to things like selling their plasma in order to get by? Next slide. So this is the rise, dramatic rise in plasma collections over this same period of time. We can see that it is roughly tripled. Next slide. We then mapped every plasma clinic in the country. And you see that map here. And we found that the best predictor of where a plasma clinic is located is not how poor the county is, but the rate of deep poverty, the rate of families living on less than half of the poverty line. So clearly, there's a market for the plasma of our nation's poor, and major multinational corporations are taking advantage of that. Next slide. So in the Mississippi Delta, this extreme $2 a day poverty is so common that in a lot of little towns in the Delta, you could throw a rock in any given direction and probably hit the house of a household living on less than $2 per person per day. I found this hanging out with families in the Delta to be a deeply moving experience. And as I was there, I met Elva May's daughter, Tabitha. Tabitha was just a lovely, bright young girl, but like her siblings, she was, going hungry. Just a week and a half into the month, the family would run out of food, and there were a lot of kids in that household. There were 6 kids that slept, the long way on a bed, a full-size bed in the bedroom, and then 6 kids slept on the floor. And if you were in the bed and you got up to go to the bathroom, you usually lost your place in the bed and you had to go sleep on the floor. So very crowded household, very tough circumstances. But she was just a real survivor. But I asked her, I said, Tabitha, well, let me back up a little bit. As she was sort of experiencing this hunger along with her and her siblings, she was inboxed on Facebook. Someone sent her a Facebook message, a teacher sent her a Facebook message, and it said, Tabitha, I've been watching you since you were young, waiting for you to mature. And then he invited her over, she was a 5th grader, to his house to have sex with him in exchange for food. So Tabitha did this for several months. She sometimes managed to slip some extra food in her backpack for her little brother, sometimes not. But she felt horribly guilty. And finally, she told a teacher. And the teacher not only got her out of the situation, he found a boarding school in Memphis. And Tabitha was admitted so she could escape the situation. It was just this astonishing story. And she did graduate then from that boarding school. But we were sitting at a place in Clarksville, Mississippi. In fact, it was the old Greyhound station. And you know, we were talking, and the dusk was falling, and I finally got so then Tabitha was relating the story about the teacher, and both the abusive teacher and the teacher who kind of rescued her from the situation. And I finally said, Tabitha, what does it feel like to be that hungry? Next slide. Next slide. She said, well, actually, it feels like you want to be dead because it's peaceful being dead. Next slide. Next slide. So some people say to me, you know, Professor Eden, Americans really aren't poor. But when I gave this presentation to some colleagues at a public health school who work all around the world, to a person that came up to me and said, what you're studying is so much harder than what we see. And of course they didn't literally mean that, but the disadvantage that we experience and that we see in the United States, in the richest country in the world, is striking and appalling, in part because of the contrast in the level of inequality in our nation. But it is worth thinking about three facts. So if we compare some disadvantaged Americans, African Americans, for example, to life expectancy, to that of people in other countries, we find a parallel in life expectancy to countries like Lebanon, Mongolia. If we switch our indicator from longevity, lifespan, to infant mortality, we find that African Americans face an infant mortality rate comparable to Tonga and Grenada. These are not usually the kind of countries we compare ourselves to. Next slide. So I just want to read a quote from my co-author, who I just felt said it so profoundly. He wrote, "We live in an America where the poor sell their blood plasma just to scrape by, fueling a multi-billion-dollar industry, where infant mortality among the vulnerable ranks with much poorer nations, where life expectancy is well below much poorer countries and falling. We can argue about the causes and consequences of poverty and what to do about it, but can anyone argue that we've really solved it?" Next slide. So what is our charge going forward? Next slide. Well, taken directly from our findings, we'd like to, we argue that everybody deserves the opportunity to work. We find that our families think of themselves as workers. They're proud to be workers. It's a core part of their identity. We need to make sure there are enough jobs to go around for everybody who has the capacity to have one. Second, parents should be able to raise children in a place of their own. You know, Jennifer shouldn't have to risk the well-being of even though all Americans do need the opportunity to work, work doesn't always work. There are situations where people can't work, sick children, elderly parents. There's some labor markets where finding and keeping work is very difficult. And so we do need a cash safety net to catch people when they fall. Next slide. But it's interesting, more than anything, what our families told us to a person, you know, we asked everybody, what was it like being part of this study? And how did you feel about, you know, us hanging out with you for these many months and years? And to a person, they said something like, if even one person, if I can alleviate even one person's suffering with my story, it will have been worth it. And so as we thought about that comment, what we realized is that more than anything, people wanted to contribute. They wanted to make a difference in their communities. They wanted to give something. They wanted dignity, right? They wanted to be part of the community. And so what we would encourage you to think about, and I know this organization already does, is that whenever you think about a new initiative, you put it to this litmus test. Will it integrate the poor? Will it make them feel a valued, dignified part of the community? Or will it isolate them from it? So dignity is a key concept that comes out of this work. And there's so many ways in which we can, through nonprofit organizations, show people who are poor and struggling that they're part of us, right? That we're one, and we're all deserving of dignity and respect. So I'll take your questions. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much, Catherine. So we did have about 5 questions come through the chat. So the first one is.
Oh, do we probably want to do the polling first?
Oh, sure, we can do the polling first.
Okay, sorry about that.
No problem.
All right, so just a little polling to make sure you're still with us. The first question: when did $2 a day poverty begin to rise? Very good. Yes, 1996, with the advent of welfare reform. Next question. This one's kind of tough. What is the TANF to poverty ratio? That's the proportion of poor families touched by the cash welfare system. What is the TANF to poverty ratio today in California? See if anyone remembers this. Okay, 70% is the correct answer. That was a tough one. But we need to compare that to what it was prior to welfare reform. So let's go to the next question. We know it's at 70% now, but what was it prior to welfare reform in the late 70s? Well, let's see. It was 121%. So it's fallen dramatically since 1970. That was a tough one. My students would not have gotten that either. Okay, I think we've got a couple more. For every 100 fewer TANF cases in a state over a year, there are how many more homeless students? $14, great job. 14 is the correct answer. And finally, we have a question where you can just write in a word or phrase. See if we can get that up. Next question, here we go. Name one way in which the $2 a day poor survive. Let's go ahead and enter a word or short phrase. Okay, what do we have? Anything? Plasma. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and go to badly, don't know. Hungry. Okay, well, let's go.
All right, you ready for some Q&A? Okay, so the first question comes from Ann Rarden. What other national organizations are you partnering with in solving our affordable housing crisis?
You know, it's since publishing this book, we've been on a tour of America, of course, abruptly ended by the COVID pandemic. But we have been visited with organizations like yours all across the country. We probably hundreds of organizations all across the country. And as well as the public housing authorities, the large public housing authorities. There's a lot of creative work being done there as well. So, you know, everything from what a hospital in St. Petersburg, Catholic hospital was sold, and a community foundation was founded, and they have a affordable housing push to Greenville, South Carolina, to Asheville, North Carolina, to Dallas, Fort Worth. So there are a lot of organizations out there like yours. I'd say one thing that's distinctive about what you do is you work in such an expensive market. So.
Great. This one comes from Lauren Borrow. Is the collapse of welfare the same in both red and blue states?
Yeah, so the collapse in welfare is worse in red states than in blue states. If you look way back historically, when in 1935, with the Social Security Act, states got a lot of leeway to run programs the way they wanted to. And so the southern states really never allowed African Americans onto the rolls. They really didn't get onto the rolls until there was a lot of legal action in the 60s and 70s because they wanted them in the fields and they wanted to keep the labor cheap. And that pattern has persisted. What happened with welfare reform is, you know, during the 60s and 70s, we kind of took control back from the state and made sure everybody who was eligible could get on. But then welfare reform was a block grant and gave states broad latitude to do what they wanted with the money, and that's what they've done. Some states have only a few hundred people on the rolls, and they're spending the money on all kinds of things, from college scholarships to crisis pregnancy centers to child care vouchers for working mothers. So yeah, it's definitely a red state. Everybody's program has declined in every state, but especially in the red states.
Okay, the next question from Karen McKay. Are you aware of any current legislative proposals that may address some of these issues that we may be able to encourage support?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. So the child tax credit, the Biden version of the child tax credit, which is going to begin for 1 year this July, will eliminate the kind of poverty I've just told you about. So it'll cut child poverty in half. It'll especially help African American and Latino kids, and it'll deliver, you know, $300 for a young child, $250 for an older child, checked to every kid, almost every kid in America, except kids in very rich households. It's dignified in that it treats poor and rich kids, poor and middle class kids alike. It says to parents, you know, we have a falling birth rate, and that's a problem for our country. But it says to parents, we know parenting is hard, and we want to give you a hand, and we want to honor you for your work as a parent. The problem with this legislation is it only lasts for 1 year. So if there's one thing I would ask you to advocate for is to make that, it's the technical name is the fully refundable child tax credit. Make it permanent. We do have a tax credit now, but it doesn't go to the poorest families because you don't begin to claim it unless you have earnings and your earnings are at a certain level. So the poorest families get nothing from the old tax credit, and the Biden tax credit is for everyone. And so it's a very exciting development, but again, it needs to expand beyond 1 year.
Okay, 2 more questions. Amanda Robertson asks, what are the trends that worry you the most and give you the most hope for the next decade?
Well, I think maybe the most worrying are, there are a couple of things that I think we really should pay attention to. For one, our lifespan, the average lifespan in the U.S. has fallen for the first time in history, and that's prior to COVID. So something, and I think it's deep poverty, but something is really making people sick. And we see this increase in deaths of despair from suicide and liver-related mortality, overdose. These are all symptoms that something is really wrong. Another similar symptom is the falling birth rate. It is dramatic, and it's happening across all demographic groups. We're well below replacement, and we need to support, if we want to support the older generations, we need young workers. So both of these are signs that Americans have lost confidence in their ability to get ahead and to form the kind of future that gives you enough confidence to pursue life goals like having a family and not giving in to despair. So that's the negative part. But I'm an optimist by nature. I think the most positive thing I see right now is the level of policy innovation. There's so many ideas out there about how to really kind of restart America and invest in America's human infrastructure. We have an opportunity right now to really think outside the box. How can we not just make modest improvements within the status quo, but how can we exit from this dual health and economic crisis with a real 2.0 set of models in mind for how to invest in our nation's future.
Great. Okay, and our last question, and thank you so much to everyone for submitting these really wonderful questions for tonight. From Katie, if you had a magic wand to fix one thing, I'm sure there's many, but just one, what would it be?
I really think that this notion that every family should be able to raise their children in a place of their own is my magic wand wish. And I remember when Ray McCormick at one point finally got an apartment, and her daughter just, was really into Dora the Explorer, and she wanted a Dora chair and a little Dora bed, and so somehow she got her for the first time her own room, and they had their own apartment, and she had her Dora the Explorer furniture in that little room. It was just amazing to see how this young girl flourished in that brief moment. Sadly, that family they were later evicted, and that furniture was thrown out by the landlord, along with all of their other possessions in a heap on the sidewalk, and they weren't able to recover it.
Okay. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Thank you.
Wow. Oh, with my deepest appreciation, I'd like to thank Professor Catherine Eden for such a wonderful keynote. I also want to thank Congresswoman Jackie Spear for opening our event, and you for spending this time with us and for helping people throughout San Mateo County to access the essential affordable housing resources and opportunities they need through our programs. Together, we can do what we can't do alone and continue to cultivate the strong, thriving, and gloriously diverse San Mateo County we all love. All right, as a little reward for those of you who stayed until the very end, we're going to draw the winner of the fun Pedega electric bike that was generously donated by Pedega Electric Bikes of Menlo Park. We'll be doing a little bonus drawing too for a one-day free Pedega bike rental. So to do the drawing, you might remember James, our self-sufficiency case manager. James, take it away, and good luck to all of you who have tickets.
Good evening, everybody. My name is James, your self-sufficiency case manager. Joining me tonight is my eldest daughter, Tiffany, and my youngest daughter, Lauren. We're going to be doing our raffle tonight, and I will turn the wheel. Tiffany will pick one name, Lauren will pick another name. The first ticket will be for the bike, and the second will be for the rental. Good luck. Pick one. Okay, pick one. Okay. Great. And the winner of the bike is Virginia Taylor. Congratulations. Okay. Ready? And the winner of the one-day rental is Virginia Taylor. Congratulations.
That's the same person.
Yes, it is.
Well, that's all, folks. Congratulations to our drawing winners, and thank you all so much for being here tonight and for your generosity. We'll be sending out an email soon updating you on our success. Thanks again to Professor Eden, Congresswoman Spear, and to our amazing sponsors, including our platinum sponsor, John and Michelle McNellis. I really miss seeing you in person, and I'm so looking forward to being back face-to-face, hopefully next year. From everyone at HIP Housing, good night, good luck, and on to recovery.